Hello there, my name is Artie, and I play a lot of games. Seriously, I think I might have a problem. Anyway, last year I made a video reviewing more or less every game I played in 2022, so I decided to keep that up and do it again for 2023. This year though, I've decided to change things up a bit. Last time I just gave a fairly lackluster review of each game, but this year I thought I would rate the games on a more standardized scale. Each game will be rated on a scale of 0 to 100, with the scale being comprised of the three core elements of a game, in my opinion. The gameplay, the graphics, and the soundtrack. Some things are, of course, more important than others, so each game will be rated on a scale of 0 to 50 for gameplay, and a scale of 0 to 25 for graphics and soundtrack. If you want a more in-depth review on any of the following games, I've reviewed many of them on my website Content Unavailable, so look out for the Thing of the Week number in the corner to find a more detailed review. Anyway, without further ado, this is pretty much every game I played in 2023. Oh, and stick around till the end for the awards that the Discord server voted on. Starting with the games I got in late December last year, as well as those in January, there's Dome Keeper, a roguelike survival mining simulator where you have to defend your dome from hordes of aliens while simultaneously mining for hidden relics. Dome Keeper has a brilliant gameplay loop with a bunch of stuff to do, very nice pixel art graphics, I especially love the monster designs, and a chill ambient soundtrack by Paxton that fits the game but isn't particularly memorable. For that reason, I'll give it a 36 for gameplay, a 19 for graphics, and a 15 for soundtrack, resulting in a grand total of 70 out of 100. Next up is Ship of Fools, a co-op seafaring roguelite where you have to sail through the seas of the archipelago, fighting heaps of monsters along the way. I absolutely loved this game. Whilst it was a little bit easy to begin with, though that's now fixed with the lighthouse levels, it's addictive and it's loads of fun with friends. It's got lovely graphics and a great art style which is super bouncy and just generally fun to look at. Complemented by an amazing soundtrack by Phillippe that fits the game perfectly and is definitely something I would listen to outside of the game. Ship of Fools gets a 40 for gameplay, a 21 for graphics, and a 22 for soundtrack, giving it an easy 83 out of 100 in total. In early 2023, I also started playing GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, a TTRPG not entirely dissimilar to Dungeons & Dragons. Whilst I wouldn't typically include non-video games, I thought I would include GURPS as it's something I've played so consistently throughout the year. It is insanely fun, probably thanks to my great GM, and there's a huge level of creativity involved in every aspect of the game. As for the graphics, well, it's a board game, so they're hyper-realistic. There's no soundtrack though. For those reasons, GURPS gets a 43 in gameplay, a 25 in graphics, and a 0 in soundtrack, netting it a total of 68 out of 100. If this rating system were actually made with TTRPGs in mind, I imagine it would get a lot more. Now back to video games for Rec Room, a game similar to Roblox with its focus on user-generated content. It's pretty fun with friends, especially when there are random kids yelling at you through their low-quality headset mic. The graphics are fine, and while there is a soundtrack, most user-made games use other music. Rec Room gets a 24 for gameplay, a 13 for graphics, and a 4 for soundtrack, getting it a 41 out of 100 overall. Then again, I really don't think this game is aimed for me. Also, I don't have a VR headset, which probably would have made it a lot more fun. Next is Treasure Adventure Game, an exploration-focused indie Metroidvania. It's fun enough, but really just a run-of-the-mill Metroidvania with some extra stuff thrown into the pot, in my opinion. I also have a really hard time with Metroidvanias specifically, for some reason. I can never get really into one without getting bored quick. Treasure Adventure Game has alright pixel art graphics, nothing particularly good looking, but it's good enough for what the game is. And as for the soundtrack, it's boppy music by Robert Ellis, but nothing I think I'd listen to outside of the game. For that, Treasure Adventure Game gets a 25 for gameplay, a 12 for graphics, and a 16 for soundtrack. Now for Warhammer Vermintide 2, a co-op hack and slasher I got when it was free in November 2022, but didn't play until January 2023. Honestly, I wish I'd played it sooner, because holy crap, is it good. It is honestly the best co-op game I've ever played. You wouldn't believe how fun it is beating up hordes of rats and chaos warriors with your mates while screaming over the mic. On top of that, it's got beautiful graphics and some absolutely stunning environments, and not a particularly memorable but good soundtrack by Jesper that complements the game well. Vermintide 2 easily gets a 46 for gameplay, a 23 for graphics, and an 18 for soundtrack, netting it a total of 87 out of 100 overall. Now for our final game of January, Valheim, a procedurally generated open-world survival game with some of the best building mechanics I've ever seen in a video game. While single player is admittedly quite boring, Valheim can be both exciting and relaxing when you play with friends. As for the graphics, they may seem initially bad, but the more you play the game, the more you'll come to realize how strangely beautiful they can be. Pair that with a great calming soundtrack by Patrik Jarlestam, and Valheim gets a 35 in gameplay, 20 in graphics, and 20 in soundtrack. So an overall 75 out of 100. Now for the February game, starting with Spinch, a psychedelic high-speed platformer which definitely merits an epilepsy warning. The game is fast and fun, and I especially like the bonus levels, which feature different mini-games. The graphics, based on the art of Jesse Jacobs, are, for lack of a better word, utterly insane and completely unique. I love them. The soundtrack by Thesis Sahib, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, isn't exactly one of the most pleasant things to listen to in your off time, but it fits the game's style absolutely perfectly. Spinch gets a 31 for gameplay, a 23 for graphics, and a 16 for soundtrack, giving it a 70 out of 100 overall. Next up is Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator, a fast-paced trading simulator where you play as a space warlord. It's quite self-explanatory, really. Anyway, I really enjoyed how completely frantic SWAT was. There was a bit of a steep learning curve at the start of the game, but it provided some good challenge and I enjoyed improving. The game isn't awfully long, but it also has quite a bit of replay value. I also love the style and how the graphics have this weird pixely filter on them. Also, Among Us Organ. SWATs also has a pretty good soundtrack by RJ Lake. The companion album is better than the in-game music though, from what I've heard at least. Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator gets a 29 for gameplay, a 19 for graphics, and a 16 for soundtrack, giving it a total score of 64 out of 100. Now for Portal, the mind-bending puzzle game from Valve. There's not much I can say for such a simple and generally good game. It's got good puzzles, funny dialogue, a great story. The graphics, albeit a little outdated, are nice, and the soundtrack by Kelly Bailey, Mike Morasky, and Jonathan Coulton has some bangers, like Portal Musica and Still Alive. Portal gets a 35 for gameplay and a 16 for graphics and an 18 for soundtrack, resulting in an overall score of 69 out of 100. Next up is Portal 2, the slightly more mind-bending puzzle game from Valve. It's such a good game, and it improves on almost every aspect of its predecessor. Better puzzles, better dialogue, better story, better graphics, better soundtrack by Mike Morasky and Jonathan Coulton, with better tracks like Want You Gone, and most importantly, Wheatley. For those reasons, Portal 2 gets scores of 45 for gameplay, 22 for graphics, and 22 for soundtrack, an overall 89 out of 100, concluding February on a high. I'm just kidding, I didn't get anything new in March. For the first game of April, we have Basilisk SNES, the mysterious quote-unquote cancelled SNES game by Akuma Kira. This and its sequel, which we'll talk about in a minute, are one of the most unique sets of games I've ever played. The gameplay itself may seem to mostly consist of walking around, but it's so much more than that. Basically, Basilisk SNES is an ARG that starts with a Super Nintendo emulator and an apparently cancelled game called Basilisk. You can explore the game and its files to try and uncover the mysteries surrounding its development. The graphics are nothing too special, but they of course feed into the plot of the game, and the same goes for the soundtrack by Akuma Kira, which is also incredibly creepy. Basilisk SNES gets a 32 for gameplay, a 19 for graphics, and a 15 for soundtrack, meaning an overall score of 66 out of 100. May sound low considering how much I just praised it, but things get better with Basilisk 2000, the sequel. This takes everything good about SNES and amps it up to 100. This time it takes place inside of a level editor for the abandoned successor to Basilisk, and you have to navigate around the levels, slowly figuring out more about the game's development and the disasters that occurred during it, whilst you unlock new areas to explore. On top of that, not all of the gameplay is even in-game. There's some puzzles where you have to dig through files and even use files from Basilisk's SNES. But I won't spoil too much. These two are games I'd make a video about one day if I was smart enough to solve all the puzzles. Anyway, Basilisk 2K also has cool graphics, stylized like a PS1 game, and its soundtrack by Akuma is both very good and integrated into the gameplay. Basilisk 2000 gets scores of 45 for gameplay, 20 for graphics, and 18 for soundtrack, resulting in a total of 83 out of 100. Next up is Crab Champions, the ridiculous arcade roguelite based on Crab Rave. Yes, the song Crab Rave. As far as roguelites go, it's fun enough, and I like the parkour and the slow-mo shooting. The graphics are very nice, but could do with optimization. The game was really laggy for some reason, as you might see in the footage, and the soundtrack by Noise Storm isn't really my type of music, but considering it's based on Crab Rave, it's not going to be. It's good overall, I'd say. Crab Champions gets a 25 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and a 17 for soundtrack, netting it a total of 62 out of 100. Now for No Man's Sky, the near-infinite open-world survival game from Hello Games. To be honest, I hadn't heard much about this game since its release, which was rocky, to say the least, so I was pleasantly surprised when I booted it up and my computer didn't instantly explode. It's a really solid survival game with an extremely impressive scale, featuring over 18 quintillion unique planets. No Man's Sky has lovely graphics and all the spaceships look awesome, and the soundtrack by 65 Days of Static isn't particularly memorable, but it's good nonetheless. This one gets a 35 in gameplay, a 23 in graphics, and a 17 in soundtrack, giving No Man's Sky an overall score of 75 out of 100. Next is Dead Estate, a roguelike shoot-em-up where you explore a haunted mansion full of Resident Evil references. It's an absolute blast, and I love exploring the levels and playing as all the different characters thanks to their completely unique playstyles. The graphics are great, with the game looking and feeling like an arcade game, and the character designs are great too. The soundtrack by Major Wipeout is also full of absolute bangers. Dead Estate gets a 40 for gameplay, 22 for graphics, and 23 for soundtrack, giving it an overall score of 85 out of 100. Now for Zuma Deluxe, PopCap's arcade puzzle game featuring this incredible frog. It's got a fun gameplay loop consisting of shooting coloured balls at other coloured balls, and it's fun to play in short bursts. The graphics are alright, nothing too special really, and the soundtrack by Phillippe has a few boppy tracks. Zuma Deluxe gets a score of 27 for gameplay and 15 for both graphics and soundtrack, netting it a total of 57 out of 100. Zuma's Revenge, our last game of May, is the sequel to the previous game and improves upon said game in many ways, featuring more levels, boss fights, and updated graphics, but a slightly less boppy soundtrack. Zuma's Revenge gets a 32 for gameplay, 18 for graphics, and 14 for soundtrack, an overall score of 64 out of 100. Only game I got in May was Subnautica, the underwater survival game from Unknown Worlds, which, in my opinion, should be classified as a horror game. I don't know why I find some aspects of the game so scary, but I just do. Anyway, as far as gameplay goes, it's a pretty basic survival game with some cool building and exploration stuff. The graphics are gorgeous, especially at night where everything starts to glow, and the soundtrack by Simon Chilinsky is fun and synthy, but nothing to write home about. Subnautica gets a 37 for gameplay, 22 for graphics, and 17 for soundtrack, a total of 76 out of 100. Now for the first game of June, Sid Meier's Pirates, the open-world naval RPG where you can plunder to your heart's content. I quite enjoyed this one. It was lots of fun to sail around and attack everything in sight, and I just love pirates. The graphics and soundtrack by Ken Legase weren't anything particularly special, but they were good enough and they fit the game. Pirates gets a 33 in gameplay, a 17 in graphics, and a 15 in soundtrack, a total of 65 out of 100. Next up is Mirror's Edge, the parkour sim from DICE. I loved playing through this, and all the parkour mechanics were very smooth and immensely satisfying. The game has good stylization, and I love the colour scheme, which accentuates the red highlights. The soundtrack by Solar Fields is pretty good, and definitely fits the game perfectly. Mirror's Edge gets a 37 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 17 for soundtrack. That means a total score of 72 out of 100. Now for Mirror's Edge Catalyst, the open-world sequel reboot of Mirror's Edge. As is typical with most sequels I've talked about in this video, it takes everything good about the original and makes it even better. I really enjoyed being able to run freely around an open world rather than being restricted to levels like in the original. The graphics are vastly improved too, with the world feeling more lively, whilst not getting rid of the idea that it's a dystopia of sorts. Finally, the soundtrack, again by Solar Fields, just fits with the game so well. Catalyst gets a 40 for gameplay, 20 for graphics, and 19 for soundtrack, a total of 79 out of 100. Next is Prey, the sci-fi survival horror game from Arcane Studios. Now, I personally am not the biggest fan of survival horror, call me a wimp all you want, but I did quite enjoy Prey. Probably because the sheer number of weapons you get makes it feel more like an action game than a horror one. I did also like exploring the space station and locating the corpses of my co-workers. Morbid, but fun. The graphics are great, and I especially love the designs of the enemies, and the soundtrack by Mick Gordon is pretty good. Prey gets a 30 for gameplay, 20 for graphics, and 15 for soundtrack, meaning an overall 65 out of 100. Now for Sherwood Extreme, the insane arcade third-person shooter set in Sherwood Forest. I gotta say, I actually loved playing this one with one of my friends. It's so ridiculous that it's just loads of fun. The graphics aren't particularly great though, with Sherwood Extreme featuring fairly generic low-poly models, but that's easily made up for by the strangely good soundtrack by Alex Weiler and Danny Mulligan, which genuinely slaps. Sherwood Extreme gets a 36 for gameplay, a 13 for graphics, and a 19 for soundtrack, for a total of 68 out of 100. Alright, now, technically, I got Sea of Thieves in 2021, but I hadn't played for a while, and I picked it up again in 2023 for the Monkey Island Tall Tales, and there was so much new stuff that it might as well have just been a different game. Also, they rebranded it as Sea of Thieves 2023 edition on Steam, so I'm saying it counts. Anyway, Sea of Thieves has an incredible gameplay loop, and it is so much fun with friends. On top of that, I find it infinitely replayable thanks to other players and the sheer number of sandbox features, meaning you can pretty much get a different experience each time you play. The graphics are absolutely gorgeous and stylized, and the game has an amazing atmosphere. And the soundtrack is just brilliant. By Robin Beanland and Chloe Kwok, it suits the game absolutely perfectly. Sea of Thieves 2023 edition gets a 47 in gameplay, a 23 in graphics, and a 24 in soundtrack, giving it an almost perfect score of 94 out of 100. And now for our final game of June, the frantic cooperative party game Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. It's got such a unique concept where you have to feed information to the person looking at the screen without seeing it yourself, whilst both parties need to solve puzzles to try and defuse a bomb. It's easily one of the most fun party games I've ever played. The graphics aren't really anything special, but the soundtrack by Liam Sauvé is very nerve-wracking and a good companion to the game. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes gets a 40 for gameplay, a 15 for graphics, and a 17 for soundtrack, an overall score of 72 out of 100. Nope. For our first game of August, we have Cultist Simulator, the cultism simulator. I loved this game. It has an addictive gameplay loop where you slowly discover more and more to do over time, and that's only improved by the fact that the game gives you almost nothing in the way of tutorials. You really do have to figure it out yourself. The graphics consist of relatively simple but very good art, and the game has a great atmosphere, as can also be seen in its soundtrack by Maribeth Solomon and Mickey Erb. It's creepy, mysterious, and generally just very atmospheric. Cultist Simulator gets a 43 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 20 for soundtrack, so an overall score of 81 out of 100. Now for Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew, the pirate stealth strategy game from Mimimi Games. I got this because, well, pirates, and I had an absolute blast playing it. It's an extremely fun stealth game with a bunch of different characters offering loads of unique strategies and ways to approach levels. It's got really nice graphics with some amazing character designs, and the soundtrack by Phillippe Bekos, which I definitely pronounced wrong, is a great companion to the game. Shadow Gambit gets a 45 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and a 19 for soundtrack, resulting in a total score of 84 out of 100. The only game in September is Immortals Phoenix Rising, an open-world RPG set in ancient Greece that is surprisingly similar to Breath of the Wild, but I'd say the world is a bit more jam-packed with stuff to do. I enjoyed a lot of elements of it, especially the exploration and the combat. Overall though, it can get a little repetitive, and some of the writing is laughably cringy. Phoenix Rising does have lovely graphics though, and a nice soundtrack by Gareth Coker. It gets a 38 in gameplay, a 22 in graphics, and a 17 for soundtrack, giving it an overall score of 77 out of 100. First game of October was Atomicrops, the post-apocalyptic roguelike farming simulator. It was very fun, and I like the merging of the farming sim genre and the roguelike bullet hell to make this weird, unique mashup that seems like the child of Stardew Valley and Enter the Gungeon. The gameplay is chaotic, ridiculous, and lots of fun. The graphics are great, and I love this style of pixel art, and the soundtrack by Jonas Turner is strange, to say the least, but of course matches the game's theme perfectly. Overall, Atomicrops gets a 39 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and 20 for soundtrack, so a total score of 77 out of 100. Next up is Abalone, the digital adaptation of the abstract strategy board game, where the goal is to push your opponent's marbles off the board. It's certainly an interesting game, but the board game version is just so much better. The graphics basically consist of PNGs, and the soundtrack is royalty-free instrumental music. I think it's fair to say that this version of Abalone gets a 25 for gameplay, a 15 for graphics, and a 10 for soundtrack, an overall score of exactly 50 out of 100. Now for Underrail, a Fallout-like isometric CRPG set inside of an underground subway system. A very interesting concept, to say the least. Whilst I admittedly didn't play much, nothing really stood out to me a lot. Looking at the Steam reviews though, most people have hundreds of hours on it, so I probably really never got properly immersed before I stopped playing. I do love the original Fallout games, so I'll probably love this too. The graphics are pretty good, mixing 2D backgrounds and 3D character models, and the soundtrack by Josh Culler is decent. Underrail gets a 32 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 15 for soundtrack, giving it a total score of 65 out of 100. In October, I also bought 3 Worms games, Armageddon, Reloaded, and WMD, all of which are turn-based tactical combat sims. Because they're so similar, I'll just do a quick fire round. Armageddon is a fun turn-based strategy game that can be quite funny at times. The graphics are fine, and the soundtrack by Bjorn Lin is pretty good too. It gets a 35 for gameplay, 17 for graphics, and 16 for soundtrack. Reloaded, gameplay-wise, is mostly the same as Armageddon, adding a couple of new things. The graphics are also a slight improvement, but the soundtrack by Oliver Wood isn't quite as good as the original. Reloaded gets a 36 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 15 for soundtrack. Finally, WMD improves further on the existing formula by adding even more stuff to play around with. That said, the vehicles do kind of suck. The graphics are much better though, and I love this new art style. And as for the soundtrack, again by Oliver Wood, it's pretty much as good as Armageddon's. WMD gets a 36 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and a 16 for soundtrack. Those are overall scores of 68, 69, and 72 out of 100, respectively. With the speed round over, let's move on. The last game of October is Blazing Sails, also known as Sea of Thieves meets Fortnite. It's a battle royale with ship-to-ship combat, sailing, and lots of cool piratey guns that I really enjoyed playing, despite the fact that I utterly sucked. The graphics are good, and the game has a very clean art style reminiscent of Sea of Thieves. On top of that, the soundtrack by Simon Felix is pretty damn good. Blazing Sails gets a 40 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and an 18 for soundtrack, yielding an overall score of 78 out of 100. Getting close to the end now. The first game of November is Quirt, the mobile word game where you have to frantically search through the dictionary. Remember lots of words to win. For a mobile game, it's very fun, and it executes its concept well. I like the aesthetic that the game's graphics are going for, but the soundtrack is comprised of royalty-free music. It does fit the game surprisingly well, though. Quirt gets a 37 in gameplay, a 15 in graphics, and a 17 in soundtrack for an overall score of 69 out of 100. Now for Gotham Knights, the open-world RPG set in a Gotham where Batman has died to the hands of Ra's al Ghul. I actually bought this game in January and attempted to play it on my old PC, but it simply did not work without smoke billowing out of my computer like a campfire. I refunded it, but it was one of the first games I was eager to try again when I got a new, and much more powerful, computer in October. I'm glad to say that it's fun, and I like wandering the city and beating up mobsters. The game does get a little repetitive on occasion, but that's rectified by the main quests, which offer unique gameplay. The graphics are very nice, and I love the costume designs for the knights themselves, and on top of that, the soundtrack by The Flight, Jarlestam, Samuel Flam, Bear McCreary, and Jean-Philippe Goncalves, whose names I most certainly did not pronounce correctly, is quite good, though nothing I think I'd listen to outside of the game. Gotham Knights gets a 33 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and an 18 for soundtrack, meaning a total score of 71 out of 100. Now for Fortnite, which I was convinced into playing for the OG season. To be honest, I had a lot more fun than I thought I would playing with friends, and I must admit there was definitely a bit of nostalgia associated with the original map. Graphics-wise, Fortnite's a good-looking game. What more can I say? As for the soundtrack by Phil Boucher, it's good enough as accompaniment to the game. Fortnite gets a 30 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 13 for soundtrack, a total score of 61 out of 100. To those 9-year-olds who think that's too low of a score, please don't kill me. Not that you could anyway. Next up is Wolvesville Classic, the mobile version of the game Werewolf, a social deduction game not dissimilar to Town of Salem. It's a very fun and occasionally very goofy party game to play with friends. The graphics are simple drawings, they're fine and not really needed for the game, and the game doesn't have a soundtrack to speak of. Wolvesville Classic gets a 41 for gameplay, a 15 for graphics, and a 0 for soundtrack, so an overall score of 56 out of 100. Next is Night in the Woods, the exploration and story-focused adventure game from Infinite Fall. It's got a great story, incredible writing, etc. It's so much fun to explore and interact with everyone. Plus, there's so many minigames that really spice things up. It's also got a gorgeous art style and amazing atmosphere, as well as an incredible soundtrack full of boppy tunes by the late Alek Holovka. Rest in peace. Night in the Woods easily gets a 43 for gameplay, a 20 for graphics, and a 23 for soundtrack, meaning an overall score of 86 out of 100. Now for Cat Quest, the 2.5D open-world RPG where you play as, believe it or not, a cat who must fight dragons, of course. Despite definitely not being aimed at my age group, it's a pretty fun open-worlder with a good amount of stuff to do. The graphics are nice, but some things feel a little out of place, like the dragons with their more detailed designs, which weirdly remind me of those old dragon-themed mobile games. The soundtrack by Z-1 is good, but feels a little stock fantasy game music. Cat Quest gets a 32 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 15 for soundtrack, so an overall score of 65 out of 100. The final game of November is Fallout Shelter, the cell-building mobile game based on Fallout. It's a fun mix of base building and exploration, though some new content once in a while probably wouldn't hurt. The graphics are good, and I love how they're using the Vault-Tec art style seen throughout the Fallout franchise for the whole game. The soundtrack isn't really present, to be honest, but what is there is good. Fallout Shelter gets a 37 for gameplay, an 18 for graphics, and a 10 for soundtrack, which means it has an overall score of 65 out of 100. And finally we're at December, starting off with Mission in Snowdriftland, the advent calendar platformer from Tons of Bits. I played a level of this each day throughout December during the countdown to Christmas, and I had a blast doing it. Each level is unique and fun, and the fact that it's made as an advent calendar only makes it more interesting. The art style is very nice and quite cute, and the soundtrack by Fabian Del Proa, again pronounced wrong, has some boppy tracks for sure. Mission in Snowdriftland gets a 38 for gameplay, a 20 in graphics, and an 18 for soundtrack. That's a total score of 76 out of 100. Next up is a game that I doubt needs much introduction. Lethal Company, 2023's sudden smash hit survival horror co-op game. Whilst it definitely isn't perfect, the game is in early access and there's already so much to do and so much fun to be had with friends. Remember how I said earlier that Warhammer Vermintide 2 was the best co-op game I'd ever played? Scratch that. Lethal Company is so unbelievably fun to play with a good group of mates. It's also one of the most clippable games I've ever played. Alright guys, I took care of the Steam leaks.
That's the bracket. Help! Open the sealed door! Open it!
Whilst the graphics may initially look bad, they fit the style of the game perfectly and can actually make things much scarier thanks to the pixel blur at a distance, meaning you can never quite make out what's too far in front of you. The soundtrack by Zekas also goes incredibly hard, especially the ice cream song. Lethal Company gets a 48 for gameplay, a 21 for graphics, and a 22 for soundtrack, an overall score of 91 out of 100. Next up is Pony Island, the suspense puzzle game from Daniel Mullins, the same guy that made Inscription and The Hex. The gameplay is very fun in some places, but can get a little tedious when going back through to get achievements. There is some really cool stuff in there though, so it's definitely worth it. The graphics aren't anything to write home about, but the soundtrack by Jonas Senzel is boppy as. Pony Island gets a 39 for gameplay, a 16 for graphics, and a 20 for soundtrack, which is a total of 75 out of 100. And for our final game of the year, we have Doom 2016, the gory first-person shooter from id Software. The gameplay is incredibly fun. I absolutely love going around punching demons' heads off. And exploring, of course. But mainly the first thing. The graphics are great, I really like the atmosphere and all the gore, as well as the original Doom levels, which are embedded into the different areas. And of course the soundtrack by Mick Gordon is incredible, and perfectly suits the intense, high-energy gore fest that Doom is. So, Doom 2016 gets a 40 for gameplay, a 22 for graphics, and a 23 for soundtrack, an overall score of 85 out of 100. And that concludes the reviews. But now, like last year, it's time for the awards ceremony, where the games featured in this video will have a chance to win a slew of unique awards for them to not put on their Steam pages. Now, I'll admit, I'm probably not the best presenter for this, so I'll hand over to someone much more suited to this job. Remus Official.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening for wherever you are. My name is Remus Official, and I will be your lovely host for the Thing of the Year Awards of 2023. It has been an eventful year, with nearly 50 potential nominees and over 20 awards in total. As usual, these awards and their respective nominees were given to the Artie Discord server for everyone in there to vote on. And now, without further ado, let's get right into the news.
Now hold on a minute, wait, are we really gonna get into the news right now? Yeah, I mean, you haven't even done anything yet, come on.
Now come on, listen. We all want to get through this here. So, let's go ahead and just get into it. Yeah, but do you have to use Killer Keemstar's thing? Like, can't you do something on your own? Fine. Let's get on to the awards, shall we?
Jeez, finally you do something.
Ahem. Anyways. First up is the best award for art. This will go to the game with the most interesting, unique, and generally good-looking art style. Here's the nominees. The nominees for this section are Valheim, Spinch, Subnautica, and Gotham Knights. And with an honest-to-truth landslide victory here, with 9 total votes, is of course the lovely game Valheim. the best Viking simulator this side of the Mississippi. Congratulations to the artists and developers of Valheim. Alright, pulling away from Best Art and moving into the Best Story Award. This game will go to the most captivating and well-written story out of all of them. The nominees for this award are No Man's Sky, Mirror's Edge Catalyst, Cultist Simulator, and Night in the Woods. And with a pretty tight victory here, with only 4 votes, the winner is Night in the Woods. Congratulations, developers and story writers. Alright, so we're segueing now from best to mid. Because let's be real, we all have mid games out there. Now it's going to be the most mid game award, which is going to go to, this is going to be shocking, I know, but the most utterly mid-range game. Like, it's not bad, but it's also not particularly great either. Unsurprisingly, the nominees for this are Rec Room, Treasure Adventure Game, Abalone, and Fallout Shelter.
Wait a minute, what even is Avalon?
Anyways, the winner with an unsurprising 6 votes is Rec Room. I guess I would say congratulations to the devs, but, you know, doesn't really imply good things. Moving on from that, now we have the Most Buggy Game Award, which will go to the most generally unstable and bug-ridden game. Once again, for the nominees, we have Rec Room, Crab Champions, Sherwood Extreme, and Gotham Knights. And the winner, with 5 votes, is Crab Champions. Okay, seriously, what are some of these games? What? Next is the Best Voice Acting Award, which will go to the game with the most fitting and well-performing VAs. Voice actors. The nominees for the Best Voice Acting Award are Warhammer Vermintide 2, Portal 2, Shadow Gambit The Cursed Crew, and the Gotham Knights. Unsurprisingly, in a landslide victory, the winner, with 9 total votes, is Portal 2. I mean, come on. You gotta hand it to GLaDOS. The way she performed as Potato, it was amazing. And now for our very prestigious Hottest Chick Award, to go to the most attractive female character. The nominees for this award are as follows. First up, we have the amazing GLaDOS from Portal and Portal 2, Faith Connors from Mirror's Edge and Mirror's Edge Catalyst, Rue from Atomicrops, and Batgirl from Gotham Knights. You know, I was just talking about her a bit ago, and the winner in a landslide victory with 10 amazing votes is, of course, GLaDOS from Portal and Portal 2. To no one's surprise, everyone loves the Potato Girl. And following that, we have the Funniest Game Award, for the game that's given everyone the most laughs, whether it's from the writing, intentional bugs, or something else. Here's the nominees. First up, once again, we have Portal 2, then we have Sherwood Extreme, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition, specifically 2023, don't get it mixed up, and Worms Armageddon. And the winner, with a total of 7 votes, is Sea of Thieves 2023 edition. Yes, it's 2023 specifically, don't at me. And next up, for the Most Gore Award, which will go to the goriest game of them all. Well, I mean, that's what the title ensues. Here's the nominees. First up, we have Warhammer Vermintide 2. Then we have Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator. What? Then we have Dead Estate and Doom 2016 edition. In a close battle of fisticuffs, the winner turns out to be, with a total of 3 votes, Warhammer Vermintide 2. And next up we have the Best Character Award, which will go to the best written and most well-defined character. Now here's the nominees. First up we have Wheatley from Portal 2, good old man who turned glass into a potato. We have Morgan Yu from Prey. We have Phoenix from Immortals Phoenix Rising. And we have Greg from Night in the Woods. And the winner for this award is going to be Wheatley, with a total of 9 votes coming from Portal 2. The dastardly computer who turned GLaDOS into a potato. I'm gonna keep bringing this up, you can't stop me. Next up is the Best Indie Game Award for the game in general made by an independent developer. And now, here's the nominees. First up we have Dome Keeper, then we have Basilisk 2000, Dead Estate, and finally we have Cultist Simulator. And in probably the tightest victory, the winner is going to be, with a total of only 4 votes, Cultist Simulator. You know, I can kind of see I kind of see the attraction to it. And now for the most creative award. This game is going to be given this award based on how creative and unique the concept and ideas are, and how the players can contribute to those. And here is the nominees. First up we have GURPS, then we have Spinch. Next, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. And then finally, we have Cat Quest. Some interesting titles here. Let's see who wins, shall we? The winner, with a total of 7 votes, is GURPS, a good old tabletop game where you decide what happens. Next up is the Best Game Studio Award, for the developers or publishers of a multitude of great games. And now, our nominees. First up we have Raw Fury, publisher of Dome Keeper and Atomicrops. Team 17, publisher of Ship of Fools and developer of the Worms games. Valve, developer of Portal games. Next up we have Electronic Arts, publishers of Zuma and Mirror's Edge games. And the winner, with 9 votes, is unsurprisingly the great and wonderful Valve. Congratulations, Valve. Great to see you. And now for the Best Updates Award, for the game that's consistently had the best post-release content updates. And now, our nominees. First up we have Dead Estate, then No Man's Sky, then followed by Sea of Thieves 2023 edition, and finally, a good old classic, Fortnite. The winner, with a total of 7 votes, is Sea of Thieves 2023 edition. Yes, it still says 2023 edition, don't at me! Next up is the Silliest Game Award, for the game that is the silliest of them all. Because you know, we all love a silly Billy here and there. The nominees for the Silliest Game Award are Spinch, Crab Champions, Zuma's Revenge, and Atomicrops. The winner, with a total of 6 votes, is Spinch. What a great and fantastic game, let me tell ya. Congratulations to Spinch and the developers for winning this award. Next up, we have the Best Pirate Game Award, for the game that is about, well, pirates, of course. Now, let's see our nominees.
Yeah, so the nominees for this award are Ship of Fools, Side Mirrors Pirates, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition, and Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew.
Oh, I have no idea what happened there. So the winner, in a landslide victory with 11 whopping votes, is, of course, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition. Congratulations, developers. Next up for the Goodest Boy Award, for the best animal character in a game. And here is our nominees. First up we have the adorable little kiwi pet from Dome Keeper. Then we have Sir Reginald from Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew. Then we have the Bundit from Atomicrops. And finally, Hero from Cat Quest. And the award goes to no one's surprise, the Kiwi Pet from Dome Keeper, with a total of 4 votes. Congratulations, developers. You did a lovely job making this little Kiwi Pet. And now, finally, I take a break from talking to pass the mic to Ek for the Fun with Friends Award.
Hey y'all, Ek here, also known as Mr. Cool Guy, Awesome Man, and Charles Gregory Smellborp Watergull Doug Diddley Piss Jonathan Great Fanta Dingleberry Hubert Gloggabalaba III. I'm introducing the Fun with Friends Award, which will go to the best co-op game. The nominees are Warhammer, Vermintide 2, Portal 2, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, and Lethal Company. And the winner With 8 votes, easy dub. Of course, it's Lethal Company. The bracket be cracking those necks. Sorry, that was a bad joke. And now back to Remus.
Oh, this is a nice break, let me tell you. Sitting here and relax. What? Oh, thanks, Zach. Anyways, next up is the Closest to Tetris Award, for the game that is closest in terms of graphics, gameplay, and sales to Tetris. And now, the nominees, picked from the top 4 using a formula from Artie B's Tetris video earlier this year. Here they are. First up we have Rec Room, and then we have Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator, Worms Armageddon, and finally, Fallout Shelter. And the winner is, with 8 votes in total, Rec Room. Probably carried by its, 29 million active users. Even though it's the most mid game. What do you know? And now for the Golden Toilet Seat, which will go to the best mobile game. And here's the nominees. First up we have Quirt. Next, Wolfsville Classic. And finally, Fallout Shelter. And the winner, or I guess in this case, winners, for the first ever tied vote, with 3 each, is Quirt and Fallout Shelter. Congratulations to the developers for making the best mobile games, and making it a tied vote for the Thing of the Year awards. And now, passing it to Brax for one of our final awards. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Remus Official, and it's been lovely hosting this for you.
Hi, I'm Graffaldi, or Brax, and I am a retired musician who also plays a lot of video games. This award is entitled Ebony Eardrum, the award for the game with the best soundtrack. The nominees were difficult to pick, but they are Ship of Fools with soundtrack by Phillippe Grant, Dead Estate with soundtrack by Major Wipeout, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition with soundtrack by Robin Belland and Chloe Kwok, and Night in the Woods with soundtrack by Alec Haloka. And the winner is, with 5 votes, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition. Fantastic vote, congratulations to Sea of Thieves 2023 edition. Time for the next award.
Thank you to all the presenters, especially you, Remus. Anyway, it's now time for the final award, the most prestigious award maybe ever, the RTE. This award will go to whichever game I had the most fun playing this year. Our nominees are GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, Sea of Thieves 2023 edition, Shadow Gambit, the Cursed Crew, and Lethal Company. Trust me when I say that this was a difficult decision to make. I spent many days trying to come up with an answer, and many nights sleeping from the exhaustion I got during the days. But I have finally come to a conclusion. The winner of the RTE award is GURPS. I think this is the most fair one I could have picked, thanks to it being the game that I've played most consistently throughout the year, almost every week. If my maths is right, that's over 150 hours of pure, unfiltered chaos with my group. I've had a blast playing GURPS, so shout out to my GM for both introducing me to it and being an absolute legend in general. And congratulations Steve Jackson Games for creating such a good TTRPG. Anyway, with that said, thank you for watching. It's been a great year, and I've had a great time making videos. I've already got some pretty cool stuff in mind for next year, so if you've not already, please do subscribe to the channel. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and thank you to everyone that helped me make this video. I'll see you all at some point in the future. Goodbye.